The first alien voice humanity ever heard arrived 7 seconds too late. Thomas Renwick was halfway through a maintenance checklist at Northlight Colony's outer relay, high above Orison, when the transmission pushed through the static. One moment, his headset carried only the dry hiss of charged dust against the rescue cutter's hull. The next, a woman's voice broke across the emergency channel. He did not understand a word. He understood the image that followed. The object drifting beyond the relay appeared on his center screen. A dark ship nearly 3 miles long, its layered hull scarred by age. A red ring closed around it. Then came a sequence of simple pictures. First, the ship was dark. Then a signal touched it. The ship woke, and thousands of figures appeared sealed inside white chambers. Last came the woman herself, staring into whatever device had recorded the warning. Her skin was pale copper, with thin blue markings at her temples. Silver rings surrounded the dark centers of her eyes. She raised one four-fingered hand and made a sharp, closing motion. The meaning was unmistakable. Do not wake it. 7 seconds earlier, lines of blue-white light had already begun spreading across the ancient hull. Thomas stared at the ship, then at the warning. Excellent timing, he said. Absolutely first-rate. His cutter marked the maintenance task as abandoned. 8 rescue beacons remained locked in the equipment rack behind him. His fuel reserve was high enough for several short flights through the Ravel drift, provided the dust did not turn ugly. The repair kit clipped beside the airlock was fully charged. Those facts had been routine 10 seconds ago. Now, they were the only things within reach of the first human being to hear an alien voice. He opened a channel to Northlight Colony. Dana, I have an unidentified vessel waking beside the outer relay. Is scanning toward Orison. Dana Holt, Northlight's operations chief, answer at once. Define unidentified, ancient, enormous, and apparently unpopular with the woman who just became first contact. Silence held for half a breath. You received an alien transmission? Receiving it now. No common language. Clear warning not to activate the ship. Did we activate it? Not unless the relay learned a new trick while I was outside. The blue light reached the ancient ship's bow. Panels opened along its sides, not like weapon ports, but like the shutters of a vast instrument. A pale beam swept across the Ravel drift toward Orison. Thomas's board filled with corrupted returns. The beam was reading atmosphere, heat, radio traffic, and biological activity. It was not looking at Northlight's buildings. It was counting the people inside them. Felix Rohn joined the channel from Colony Traffic Control. Thomas, every guidance system on the East Launch Field just received a handshake request. It is trying to map our flight network. Do not answer it. We aren't. And hold every outbound vehicle until we know what counts as an answer. Dana's voice hardened into the calm she used when an emergency stopped being theoretical. Thomas, determine what that ship intends. You have local authority over the relay and your rescue equipment. I am freezing civilian launches now. Understood. The ancient ship moved. Not forward. Something small burst from an opening near its middle and tumbled into the dust. Thomas magnified the image. The object was a compact survey pod, its attitude jets firing in uneven bursts. It crossed the ship's wake, clipped a stream of charged particles, and began spinning faster. A life sign flashed inside it. Thomas released the relay clamps. I'm going after the pod. Dana did not waste time arguing. Distance, 200 miles and opening. Your cutter is not rated for a prolonged crossing in that field. Then I will avoid making it prolonged. He pushed away from the relay. The cutter was built for damaged shuttles, failed docking rings, and people who had discovered too late that empty space did not forgive carelessness. It was not elegant. Its broad maneuvering thrusters could shove hard in any direction, and its hull carried more reinforcement than speed. The Ravel drift struck like glittering rain. Each grain was smaller than sand, but the particles carried enough charge to paint green fire across his forward shield. His navigation display shivered as the dust bent the relay signals into false positions. Thomas ignored the distant markers and flew by the pod's visible motion. It spun once every 4 seconds. Too fast for a rigid capture. If he locked on without matching the rotation, he would tear the pod apart. He brought the cutter alongside, rolled to match, and watched the stars circle beyond the pod. The woman from the warning was inside. She had one hand on a failing control panel and the other braced against her seat. Dark hair floated around her face. Her eyes found his cutter through the window. She did not freeze. She looked at his maneuvering thrusters, then pointed twice toward her pod's tail. Thomas checked the thermal view. One of her attitude ports was stuck open. "Good," he said, though she could not hear him. "You know why you're spinning? That makes one of us." He sent a pulse of white light, then flashed the same pulse twice. She watched, considered, and fired her remaining port once. The spin slowed. Thomas repeated the pattern. She answered again. By the fourth exchange, the pod was rotating slowly enough for his rescue arms to close around its frame. The impact traveled through the cutter with a deep metallic thump. Warning lights flared, then settled. The woman's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Thomas gave her a thumbs up. She looked at the gesture, looked at him, and raised two fingers in what might have been agreement or a request to remove one of his. Close enough. He attached the pod to the cutter's side, rather than bringing it into the airlock. Their atmospheres might not match, and he had no wish to turn first contact into an accidental poisoning. Thomas extended the cutter's sampling arm and drew a trace of gas from the pod's damaged attitude port. The result appeared beside his own cabin mixture. Zeyra breathed mostly familiar gases, but the pressure was lower and several trace compounds would have irritated human lungs. Her medical broadcast also suggested that her blood carried oxygen in a molecule close enough for human systems to recognize, yet different enough to demand caution. Opening both cabins would be reckless. Thomas sent Zeyra two images. In the first, their compartments remained sealed and both figures stayed green. In the second, the doors opened and both figures turned red. Zeyra studied the comparison, then locked her own hatch. "Good. We agree on not killing each other by ventilation." She could not understand the sentence, but she recognized his relieved tone. She checked the seals around her window and transmitted her remaining pressure. The pod could support her for several hours if its power stayed stable. Thomas offered a return path to the ancient ship. Zeyra rejected it at once. She showed the technical opening closing around her pod, followed by the old vessel discarding it again. He showed a path toward Northlight. Zeyra rejected that too. She placed the ancient ship's scanning beam between her pod and the colony. Bringing her close to Northlight might confirm the settlement as part of the same rescue request. That left only Thomas's cutter and the outer relay. First contact had not begun with a greeting. It had begun with two people agreeing which doors must remain closed and which direction they could not safely travel. The ancient ship's scan reached Orison. Data flooded Thomas's screens. The alien woman leaned toward her controls and sent an image through the physical link between their craft. A blue sphere represented Orison. A cluster of lights marked Northlight Colony. Around those lights, white capsules closed one after another. Then she showed him another world under a copper-colored sky. The same capsules covered its cities. Istrava, though he did not know the name yet. The woman pointed to herself, then to that world, then to the ancient ship. Thomas brought up a diagram of Orison and highlighted Northlight. He touched his chest. "Thomas." He sent the name as sound and text. She studied his mouth. "Thomas." Her pronunciation softened the last syllable, but it was clear. She touched her own chest. "Zeyra Noal." "Zeyra." She nodded once, then pointed urgently at the ancient ship. Thomas placed a simple question on both displays. He paired the ship with an open hand and then a closed fist to ask what it intended. Zeyra answered with a symbol that resembled a loop broken by 5 short bars. She paired it with images of people entering capsules. Then she transmitted a short burst of tones. The ancient ship's scanning beam slowed. Only for 3 seconds, but Thomas saw it. Zeyra's code could affect the ship. "Dana, our visitor has some kind of command access. Can she shut it down?" If she could, I suspect she would have led with that. Zeyra pointed to the blue markings on Thomas's display that represented the scan, then held both hands apart. Her meaning was simple. She could delay the ship, but she could not stop it. Thomas sent her the image of the warning and placed it beside the local time of reception. Then he asked for her record. She opened a log filled with symbols his system could not read. The clock values meant nothing to him. Even if he trusted them, he did not know how long an Istvan second was. He needed evidence they could share. Thomas selected 3 stable pulsars used by human navigation. He displayed their positions and pulse patterns. Zeyra's eyes narrowed with recognition. She pulled the same stars from her record and overlaid the pulse phases captured when she had sent the warning. They were wrong for the present sky. Not randomly wrong. They matched a sky from months earlier. Thomas checked the pod's energy use and navigation history. Its depleted jump system showed a major discharge consistent with a flight from another star. The physical wear in its maneuvering ports matched weeks of operation. Zeyra's claim was not based on her clock. It was written into the state of her ship. A sharp tone sounded from the relay. Another alien packet had arrived. Thomas compared its direction to the warning. The new packet had entered from the sunward side of the Ravel drift. Zeyra's warning had arrived from far above the orbital plane. Both carried layers of distortion, but the patterns were different. He plotted the paths. The charged dust did not merely scatter the signals. Long strands of plasma were bending coherent packets around the field, sometimes trapping them in broad curves before releasing them toward Orison. The activation packet had found a shorter path. The warning had spent months on a longer one. No time, travel, no message from the future. Just 2 signals arriving in an order their sender had never intended. Thomas showed the model to Zeyra. She closed her eyes. The reaction was not relief. It was confirmation of something she had feared. Thomas added more possible paths through the dust. Dozens of them. He placed question marks along each. Zeyra looked at the old ship, then nodded. There could be more packets coming. The ship's beam vanished. For one hopeful second, Thomas thought the scan had ended. Then a clean signal reached every human receiver around Orison. It carried no spoken language, only a sequence of images. Northlight Colony appeared as a field of biological lights. A boundary formed around it. A line connected the colony to the ancient ship. White capsules opened. Thomas did not need Zeyra to translate. The machine had classified Northlight as a population awaiting rescue. Dana's voice came through. Our launch systems are being queried again. I can order an evacuation, but if that thing takes control of traffic, we could put hundreds of vehicles in the same corridor. Thomas studied the old ship's power distribution. Its outer sections could be disabled by a focused overload from the relay. The core was harder, but not impossible if Northlight directed its power grid through Thomas's transmitter. He sent Dana a rough plan. Zeyra saw it cross the shared display. She struck the console with the heel of her hand and transmitted a flood of images. The capsules and heartbeats shared the same power lines. When those lines went dark, the heartbeats stopped. Thomas slowed the sequence and sent it to Leah Benton, Northlight's chief medical officer. Leah did not answer for nearly a minute. In that time, the ancient ship expanded its control field by another 400 miles. At last she said, "Those are biological rhythms. Thousands of them. Different ages, different body sizes, all in induced low metabolism. Can you confirm the core powers the chambers? The energy pulses are synchronized. If the diagram is accurate, shutting down the central source would collapse life support across the whole vessel. How long would they have? Not long enough for us to reach them." Thomas removed the overload plan from the display. Zeyra watched him do it. He pointed to Northlight and then to the sleepers. He placed both inside the same open hand. Both. Zeyra held his gaze through 2 layers of glass and touched her hand to the window. Both. The ancient ship began drawing a control boundary around Orison. Thomas turned his cutter toward its open technical port. "Dana, cutting power is off the table." "Then what is on it?" Thomas looked at Zeyra, at the unreadable code flowing across her screen, and at the warning that had arrived 7 seconds too late after traveling for months. "We teach each other how to give that ship an order it cannot receive in the wrong sequence." The first misunderstanding nearly froze Zeyra inside her own pod. Thomas had moved the cutter into the lee of the ancient ship, where the hull blocked the worst of the charged dust. He and Zeyra had spent 20 minutes building a working set of symbols. A dot meant a person, a line meant power. A repeated square represented one of the white chambers. They had even agreed on simple states for safe, danger, continue, and stop. Then Thomas asked whether the chamber systems could be separated from the ship's mission. He drew the power source, the chambers, and the control core. He placed a break in a line between the last two. Zeyra answered with the broken loop and 5 bars. Thomas had seen her use the loop when discussing the ship's active process. He thought she meant break the cycle. He isolated the auxiliary relay connecting her pod to the cutter. The change silenced the pod at once. Zeyra's image vanished. Her thermal reading began to fall. No, wrong line. Thomas restored the switch. Nothing happened. A surge from the Ravel drift had tripped a physical breaker inside the external coupling. He clipped into his suit and opened the airlock. The ancient ship filled half the sky, its lit seams making it look less like a vessel than a sleeping city opening its eyes. Thomas crossed the cutter's hull on magnetic boots. Static crawled across his gloves and snapped at the tool case on his hip. The pod's temperature dropped another degree. He reached the coupling, removed the blackened cover, and found the breaker fused against its housing. It would not reset. He bridged the damaged contact with a spare conductor from his kit, insulated it, and watched green light return to the line. Zeyra's image reappeared. She stood over her console with a tool in one hand. She had been trying to restore the link from her side rather than waiting for him. Frost clouded the lower edge of her window, but her posture was steady. Thomas pointed at himself, then at the switch he had thrown. He replayed his question, his interpretation, and the resulting loss of heat. Last, he marked his choice as wrong. Zeyra stared at the sequence. He expected anger. It would have been reasonable. Instead, she pointed at the broken loop and rebuilt it by adding all 5 bars one at a time. Only after the 5th did she show the cycle changing. The symbol did not mean break. It meant incomplete. Thomas renamed the symbol in his notes. It had been cut the loop. He changed it to the crooked ladder because the bars looked as if someone had leaned a ladder inside a circle and then changed their mind. Zeyra watched the words appear in his system. She could not read English, but she saw him replace one visual tag with another. She drew the loop, added 2 legs and a pair of arms, and made it stumble. Thomas laughed before he could stop himself. Yes, exactly. Crooked ladder. Her mouth moved in what might have been the Istravan version of a dry comet. He returned to his seat and established a stricter method. They would define a symbol by predicting a visible result. They would send the smallest possible test. If the result matched, they would keep the symbol. If it did not, they would discard it. They began with numbers, direction, and distance. Zeyra's mathematics used different shapes but the same relationships. From there, they added machine states, energy flow, open, closed, earlier, later, living, sleeping. Abstract ideas remained beyond reach. Thomas could not ask why she had come. Zeyra could not explain guilt, but they could discuss what a valve would do before either of them touched it. And that was enough to begin. Her pods. Transmitter weakened again. Thomas showed her the energy reserve. At its current rate, the link would fail in less than an hour. Zeyra looked at her, remaining maneuvering power. It was the only reserve that might let her pod detach and move independently. She selected the entire reserve and routed it into the transmitter. Thomas raised a hand. Wait. She answered with the symbol for both groups of sleepers and Northlight. Then she confirmed the transfer. The pod's engines went dark. Her signal strengthened. The choice stranded her beside him. Thomas pointed to her pod, then to his cutter, placing both under his control symbol. He wanted her to know he understood what she had given up. Zeyra considered him, then used the stumbling figure she had drawn for the crooked ladder. She pointed it at his cutter. My ship is not that bad, Thomas said. She repeated the symbol. It has personality. Her expression changed. Not a human smile exactly. The silver rings around her eyes narrowed, and the tension at the corners of her mouth eased. Felix broke into the channel. Thomas, we have a launch trying to leave the eastern field. Medical transport. Their crew says they can clear the control boundary before it closes. They cannot know that. They are already airborne. On Thomas's display, a small human craft rose from Northlight. The ancient ship responded with a narrow beam. The transport's guidance signal vanished. Its nose turned without pilot input, and it settled into a safe holding orbit above the colony. The machine had not fired a weapon. It had simply removed the crew's ability to choose. Dana came on the line. All launches grounded. No exceptions. We just lost our last clean evacuation window. Thomas looked at the boundary spreading around Orison. Then we make a new window. He released 3 rescue beacons from the cutter's rack. Each beacon was a squat cylinder built to guide damaged ships through smoke, debris, or electrical storms. They could link by radio, but they also carried narrow optical transmitters for conditions where radio could not be trusted. Thomas placed the first near the relay, the second 20 miles closer to the ancient ship, and the third across a dense ribbon of charged dust. He sent the same pulse from all 3. The radio returns arrived out of order. The optical flashes did not. Zeyra studied the result, then built a spatial model around the beacons. Her hands moved quickly over the controls, graceful and exact. She shifted the third point farther outward and indicated that the dust ribbon would drift between the first 2 within minutes. Thomas adjusted the second beacon. He sent a test pulse to the first device, intending it to trigger the next. Zeyra saw the pattern and reacted before he could attach a symbol explaining it. She transmitted a blocking code toward the ancient ship, believing Thomas had begun another command. The ship accepted her block as the newest authenticated signal. For less than a second, then another old packet arrived through the Revel drift. The control boundary around Orison closed. The ancient ship sent a command into Northlight's traffic network. Felix swore under his breath as launch guidance, orbital tugs, and emergency beacons all shifted to the old ship's authority. At the same moment, a wave of charged dust struck Thomas's third beacon. Its power system flared bright white and died. "Beacon 3 is gone," Thomas said. Dana heard the change in his voice. "How many remain?" 7. "How many do you need?" Thomas examined Zeyra's growing command diagram. He did not yet understand the 5 divisions inside it, but he understood the route she was drawing through the dust. 7. Zeyra replayed her blocking action, the arrival of the old packet, and the expanding boundary. Then she marked her own choices wrong. Thomas answered with the same symbol he had used after his mistake. It meant wrong, understood, continue. She looked at him for a long moment and returned the confirmation. Their errors had cost Northlight its open routes and one of his 8 beacons. They had also given Thomas the clearest evidence yet of how the ship decided what counted as present. It did not care when a command had been created. It cared which valid command reached at last. Zeyra assembled a smaller sequence, one that did not attempt to change the ship's mission. She showed the active control field, added a pause, and tied the pause to her code. Thomas made her predict the visible result. She indicated that the field should stop expanding but not disappear. He relayed the plan to Dana. It is a delay command. If this works, it buys time. It does not release traffic. How much time? We will know if it works. That is not my favorite unit of measurement. Mine either. Thomas and Zeyra sent the sequence. The control field stopped. Felix confirmed it. No new guidance takeovers. The systems it already holds are still locked. Thomas watched the timer pass at 10 seconds, then 30, then 1 full minute. Zeyra's shoulders eased. At 1 minute and 12 seconds, an older activation packet arrived from below Orison's orbital plane. The control field resumed expanding. The ship had not rejected their delay. It had obeyed it. Then it had obeyed the next valid order, even though that order was months older. Thomas added the event to his route map. 3 separate packets had now reached the ship from 3 different directions. The lines through the Revel drift resembled tangled wire. There was no way to know how many remained. There was also no point in racing them one command at a time. Zeyra touched the 5 bars inside the broken loop. 5 parts would form one complete change. Thomas pointed to the linked beacons and showed each one waiting for the previous flash. Together, They would carry one ordered command. Zeyra understood. Before they could build it, they needed to know what the 5 parts meant and whether the sleepers could survive the change. Thomas guided the cutter toward the technical opening that had expelled Zeyra's pod. The opening was just wide enough for the cutter's rescue arms. He kept Zeyra's pod secured to the cutter's exterior and eased forward until the old hull filled the view around both craft. The interior contained no welcoming lights. Pale strips activated one by one as Zeyra sent her code. The first door opened. The second remained sealed. Thomas moved the cutter close to an exterior data panel. The panel's transmitter had power, but no usable signal. Its contact surface was burned and pitted. He suited. Up again. This repair took longer. The alien materials did not match anything in his kit, but the problem was familiar. A transmitter needed power, a signal path, and an antenna. He did not need to understand the civilization that built it to find which of those 3 was missing. Zeyra watched through the pod window as he bridged the damaged path. When he restored it, a vast set of medical readings poured into the cutter. Leah inhaled sharply over the channel. I have them. Thousands. Their metabolism is low but stable. Can the chambers be detached from the collection system? Not from here. I can see separate control channels, but they all draw from the same central pulse. Zeyra moved her hands across her panel. The corridor beyond the sealed door appeared on Thomas's screen. It led to rows of chambers that extended beyond the sensor's range. Each chamber contained an Ishtrevan. Some were tall, some were compact and broad-shouldered. All were adults, preserved without visible harm, their faces calm beneath clear covers. Their pods bore the same 5-bar loop Zeyra had shown Thomas. Thomas moved the cutter's camera along one row. The chambers had been arranged by medical need rather than rank or status. A pilot's dark uniform lay beneath one transparent cover. A worker's pressure suit filled another. Several occupants wore the same silver chest marker Zeyra carried on her flight suit. Zeyra touched that marker, then pointed to the chambers. Her people. The scanner showed no sign they had boarded willingly or fought the process. The old ship had reduced their metabolism before moving them. From its perspective, calm biological readings proved the rescue had succeeded. Leah asked Thomas to hold the camera on a chamber's lower panel. There, the system is waiting for a receiving code. Meaning what? Meaning it does not consider keeping them alive enough. It expects someone at the destination to accept medical responsibility before it wakes them. Thomas looked at the endless rows, and it never found that someone, or it never recognized them. Zeyra followed their focus and opened the same field on her display. It showed an empty shape beside every chamber, a space reserved for whoever would take responsibility after delivery. Thomas placed the human medical channel in that space. The ship rejected it. Zeyra tried her own code. The field opened for a moment, then closed because her rescue request was still active. The person who had called the ship could not also certify that the mission was complete without changing the original order. That response explained 2 things at once. The Ishtravans remained asleep because no recognized handover had occurred. The ship continued searching because its definition of rescue included gathering every threatened population on its ancient map before returning them to a receiving authority. Northlight was not a new target chosen at random. It was the next unfinished item in an old emergency. The ship had rescued them according to its own definition. It had never asked whether they wanted to be saved this way. Zeyra brought up another set of records. The people in the chambers had been waiting for a recognized receiving authority. Until one appeared, the ship would keep them asleep, continue its mission, and gather more. Thomas finally understood the last image in her original warning. The ancient ship was not collecting bodies. It was collecting unfinished rescues. He studied the authorization marks attached to the chambers. One pattern matched the code Zeyra had used to delay the ship. Not approximately. The same inner sequence repeated inside both. Thomas looked through the glass at her. Zeyra had gone still. She knew what he had found. Before he could ask, Felix's voice cut through. The ship is taking full control of the orbital lanes. It is not just redirecting launches now. It is closing approach paths around Northlight. Dana followed. We have moved everyone out of the outer facilities. If the next stage affects life support, I need to know before it begins. Thomas saved the matching authorization patterns. He did not accuse Zeyra. Evidence told him she was connected to the wake command. It did not yet tell him why. He sent her a simple sequence that joined the core, the mission, and the change they needed. Zeyra answered with the 5 bars and pointed deeper. Into the ship. They had to reach the core. And before Thomas trusted her with Northlight survival, he needed the truth about the code that had awakened it. Thomas pulled the cutter away from the sealed inner door before the ancient ship could trap it in the service passage. He returned to the shelter of the outer hull and set the 2 surviving test beacons between the ship and the relay. The first beacon flashed. The second saw the light and flashed in return. Radio echoes arrived from 3 directions over the next 9 seconds. The direct flashes remained in order. Thomas repeated the experiment after Zeyra shifted both beacons above the thickest stream of dust. Again, the radio returns wandered. Again, light moved from the first device to the second without ambiguity. He drew 2 clocks on the display. One belonged to him, the other to Zeyra. He crossed both out. Then he drew the 2 beacons. They did not need to agree on the length of a second. They needed one event that could not happen until another event had already occurred. Thomas proved the distinction a 3rd time. He told the first beacon to flash whenever its internal clock reached a chosen number. He told the second to do the same. Their clocks had been synchronized less than an hour earlier, yet electrical noise made their radio reports disagree about which had acted first. Then he cleared both schedules. The first beacon flashed only when Thomas touched the control. The second remained dark until the light from the first reached its optical sensor. No timestamp had to be trusted. Anyone watching could see that the second event depended on the first. Zeyra extended the demonstration. She ordered the second beacon to return its own flash before the first considered the exchange complete. A lost pulse would stop the sequence instead of allowing later steps to continue in an uncertain order. Thomas added a command section to each successful handshake. The beacon would not need to understand the order. It would only need to hold one verified piece until the previous device gave permission to release it. The old packets wandering through the Revel drift could still strike the ship between those releases. They could change what the vessel was doing at that moment. They could not make the 4th beacon give permission before the 3rd. Zeyra placed the 5 command fields inside a protected transaction in the core. Once a field arrived, the ship would verify it and wait for the next. Until all 5 were present, the live rescue process would continue outside the transaction. That was the danger and the advantage. The delayed packets could keep pushing the collection forward while she worked, but they could not scramble the parts already waiting in the core. If Thomas preserved the physical sequence, Zeyra could commit one complete replacement at the end. The idea was not a better clock. It was a chain of causes that could not lie about their order. Zeyra took the 5-bar loop and placed each bar on a separate point in a longer chain. At the beginning, she added her authorization pattern. At the end, she added a symbol Thomas had not seen before, a solid shape closing around an open path. He marked it as a question. Zeyra showed the ancient ship moving between stars. The solid shape appeared. The ship stopped moving. "Lock," Thomas said. He sent the word with an image of a door that could no longer open. Zeyra listened and tried the sound. "Lock." The partial language model in Thomas's computer had accumulated enough paired sounds and images to recognize a handful of words. It could not translate sentences. It could suggest when a sound had repeatedly appeared beside the same object. Zeyra pointed to the 5 bars one at a time. The first paired her face with the authorization code and meant identity. The second paired the chambers with steady heartbeats and meant people already safe. On the third, the capsules around Northlight opened to show the new purpose. The fourth passed the chambers into 2 open hands, one human and one Istrovan, to show the handover. The fifth closed the path behind all the others and meant lock. Thomas placed 7 beacons around the chain. The first would begin the physical sequence. The next 5 would release the command sections after the proper handshakes, and the final beacon would confirm completion near the ancient. Hull before the core committed the lock. 7 devices. Exactly what he had left. He ran the arrangement through the cutter's flight model. The positions formed a broken arc through the Ravel drift. If he placed them too close together, a single charged wave could disable several at once. Too far apart, and the optical links could lose sight of each other behind the dust. Zeyra adjusted the positions using the drift's movement. The result gave him a route, but it also showed how long she would need inside the core. Nearly 4 hours. Northlight might not have 4 hours. Thomas sent the projected timing to Dana. The ship is holding its current stage, she said, but the power building in its outer sections is increasing. Leah believes those systems are designed to pull heat from enclosed habitats. How long before they are active? Her best estimate is 4 hours and 20 minutes. Thomas looked at his route. That is uncomfortably precise. I asked for the most conservative number. Of course you did. Dana's voice softened by 1 degree. Can you do it? Thomas looked through the glass at Zeyra. She was still breaking the old command into pieces, checking each symbol against the ship's response. No one on Orison could do her part. No one in her powerless pod could do his. If the 7 beacons work, and if one fails, then I repair it. You'll be outside the cutter in the densest part of the drift. I noticed I am authorizing you to use every beacon. Northlight will have no independent rescue chain after that. Understood. Do not make me regret giving the first alien in human history our last set of road signs. Thomas smiled despite the pressure. Technically, I am giving her 7. He closed the channel before Dana could answer. Zeyra had opened a new layer of the ship's data. It showed a central band running from the mission core to a structure wrapped around the jump drive. Every time the ship had jumped, that structure had preserved the destination and mission state against power loss. Thomas followed the lines. The mission was not stored in an ordinary memory bank. It was written into the same navigation lattice that calculated a path between stars. Zeyra showed the new mission entering the lattice. The old route disappeared. The lattice went dark. Thomas tested temporary storage, external memory, and repeated commands. Every path ended with another old packet arriving and reopening the original mission. The only permanent state was also terminal for the drive. Destroying the jump capability would not blow up the ship. It would consume the stored field pattern and leave the navigation lattice unable to form another corridor. The sleepers would live. They would also be stranded in orbit around Orison. Thomas placed a Strava on the display and drew the impossible distance between the worlds without a jump. Zeyra did not look away. She put her hand over the lock symbol to show that the sacrifice was her choice. Thomas touched the display beside her hand and added their symbol for both. They would not reach that choice unless they survived the next 4 hours. For a short time, there was nothing to do but let the ship expose more of the command structure. Thomas used the pause to eat half an emergency ration and drink water. Zeyra watched with open curiosity, then held up a sealed container from her pod. Its contents were dark blue and moved slowly in low gravity. Thomas looked at his pale ration bar. You win. Zeyra's computer had learned the sound attached to favorable results. It offered her a rough image. She looked at his food, then at hers, and gave him the stumbling, crooked ladder figure. He accepted the judgment. The light moment faded when Zeyra opened images from Strava. Thomas had seen the world in technical diagrams. This time she showed him a city beneath a copper sky. Broad silver canopies curved over public squares. Survey craft moved between towers and the high atmosphere. Zeyra appeared in one image wearing a dark flight suit, standing beside a group of pilots. Then the sky changed. A chain of solar eruptions had struck during an evacuation emergency, disabling parts of Strava's orbital shield. Zeyra's survey team had found an ancient rescue signal buried in navigation records. She had sent the activation code because every modern option was failing. The old ship arrived and saved people the way it had been built to save them before supernova. It took control. It froze thousands. By the time Strava's own system stabilized, the ship had already jumped away with the people it had collected. Its mission map still held settlements from an emergency that had ended centuries ago. Zeyra showed her warning leaving Ostrava. Then she showed her survey craft following the ancient ship's trail. The images did not tell Thomas who had sent the activation code. She kept herself outside that part of the sequence. But he saw the way her fingers paused over the authorization pattern. Thomas sent her an image of Northlight. It was not a grand city. Northlight had been built around a chain of warm underground habitats near a mineral-rich basin. Its surface towers collected light and transmitted it below. In the image Thomas chose, maintenance crews stood outside a newly opened tunnel, faces dirty and proud. "Home," he said. The language system gave Zeyra the image and the sound. She touched the picture of Ostrava. "Home." Thomas placed the two worlds on opposite sides of the display. He drew the old ship between them. Zeyra added two open hands beneath both. She selected the image of Northlight's maintenance crew and enlarged the faces. Her gaze moved from one person to the next. Then she returned to the chamber records and selected a row of sleeping Istravans. The images were not mathematically equivalent. Thomas had no symbol for moral equality, and Zeyra had no English word for it. She solved the problem by placing one steady heartbeat beneath every face. She had given every life the same measure. Thomas understood. He opened the cutter's inventory and showed her the 7 remaining beacons. Then he placed Northlight's evacuation route beside them. If he used the beacons for the command chain, the colony would lose its independent guidance path. Zeyra immediately removed 2 beacons from the proposed chain and tried to bend the remaining route around the thickest dust. The simulation failed. One optical gap became too wide, and the sequence broke. She tried again. The result failed at a different point. Thomas restored all 7 devices to the model. Zeyra pointed to Northlight, then to the empty evacuation route. Her expression asked what would happen if the command failed. Thomas showed his cutter returning to the dead beacon line. He placed himself beside the repair symbol. Zeyra shook her head. She added the thermal sinks, the approaching deadline, and his ship's falling energy. Thomas did not erase them. He marked each risk as real. Then he returned his figure to the broken link. His job was not to promise that nothing would go wrong. His job was to go where the link failed and make the best repair possible with the time he had. Zeyra watched the sequence twice. She placed herself inside the mission core. Around her, she drew the chamber controls and the 5 empty fields. If Thomas's chain stopped, she would have to hold the live collection process without knowing whether he could resume. Thomas added the same heartbeat beneath both of their figures. It was the same measure for both of them. Neither role mattered less. Neither could be replaced by the other. Zeyra reached toward the share display. Thomas did the same, their fingers meeting only as 2 patches of light on opposite screens. The contact lasted 1 breath. Then she returned to the command map, and Thomas returned to the flight route. They had given each other more than data. Thomas had committed one of Northlight's beacons to proving a method that might save her people. Zeyra had drained the last independent power in her pod to keep Northlight's medical link alive. Neither sacrifice was enough to solve the crisis. Together, they made the next choice possible. An alert cut across the screen. One of Thomas's predicted signal paths had brightened inside the Ravel drift. A large packet was approaching the ancient ship. He pulled its leading edge into the analyzer. The authorization pattern matched Zeyra's. This time, there was no missing bar and no distortion hiding the source. The inner sequence was identical to the code she had just used to open the mission records. The packet reached the ship. Power surged into its control systems. A second boundary closed around Northlight. Guidance channels vanished from Felix's board 1. After another. "Thomas," Felix said, "we have lost every outbound lane. The ship is deploying objects toward the colony. Small collection units separated from the ancient hull. They carried no weapons. Wide radiator surfaces unfolded from their sides as they descended toward Orison. Leah came onto the channel. Those devices are thermal sinks. If they connect to Northlight's environmental network, they can pull heat from the outer habitats." Dana did not ask whether that would be uncomfortable. "We are clearing the surface facilities and the upper service rings now," she said. "Once the sinks reach occupied sections, I have to act." Thomas kept his eyes on Zeyra. He placed her code beside the packet that had triggered the new stage. Then he placed the image of his Strava beside both. Zeyra did not touch the controls. "You," Thomas said. The language system had learned that word. She looked at him. "You." She could deny it with a gesture. She could close the link or send another partial image. Instead, Zeyra unlocked every record in her pod. The first image showed her at a survey transmitter on a Strava during the emergency. She entered the old code herself. She aimed it at the coordinates hidden in the navigation archive. The ship woke because she had called it. She showed the first chambers closing over the people it claimed to rescue. She showed herself trying to stop the process, then sending warnings toward every settlement along the ancient route. She had not known the Revel drift would reorder the transmissions. Last, she showed her survey craft jumping after the old ship. She reached Orison first, docked inside a maintenance port while the ship remained at low power, and tried to access the core. When a delayed part of her original activation code arrived, the ship woke fully and expelled her unrecognized craft. Thomas understood the sequence. He also understood why she had hidden it. "You wanted me to trust your warning before I knew you caused the danger." The language model could not carry that sentence, so he broke it into images for warning, trust, her code, and Northlight in danger. Zeyra lowered her head. Then she placed the core shutdown symbol on the screen and pointed to Thomas. She had feared he would turn the ship off. Thomas wanted to tell her she had been wrong to hide it. He wanted to say that truth given only after discovery was not the same as truth offered freely. Northlight did not have time for a speech, and Zeyra did not yet have the language to hear one. He sent her one question. Were more packets coming? Zeyra opened the transmission history. Uncertainty still spread across more than a dozen paths, and the answer was yes. She gave Thomas the complete authorization key, including the parts that could place the ship into mission edit mode. If he sent the key to Northlight, human engineers might eventually learn to use it against the ship. She handed him the only power she had left. Thomas transferred the records to Leah and asked her to verify the sleeper's condition again. "Stable for now," Leah said. "If the core stops, their chambers fail." That has not changed. He asked Felix to compare Zeyra's jump record with the ship's arrival. "They match," Felix said. Her craft entered the system before the warning reached the relay. The old vessel came out of a jump, drifted for 6 hours, and woke when that packet arrived. Thomas checked the pulsars, the energy use, and the signal signatures one final time. Zeyra had caused the crisis. She was also telling the truth about how it had happened. Donna spoke quietly. "I need your recommendation." Thomas looked at the sleepers, then at the thermal sinks, descending toward the only home he had on Orison. "If we destroy the ship, the people inside die. If we let it continue, it takes Northlight. The only option that saves both is the ordered command. Can you trust her to enter it?" Thomas looked at Zeyra. "I trust the evidence, and I trust that she has more to lose from failure than anyone." Zeyra did not understand all his words, but she saw him remove the core shutdown option. She placed her authorization key between them. Thomas accepted it. Then he showed her the route into the core and the beacon path through the Revel drift. Zeyra pointed to herself, then the core. Thomas pointed to himself, then the 7 beacons. They placed both paths beneath the same lock symbol. The plan was set. During the next 40 minutes, every person involved did only what moved the plan forward. Dana cut non-essential power across Northlight, reduced radio traffic, and ordered the emptied surface district sealed. The lower activity made the colony look less chaotic to the ancient ship and slowed the collection unit's approach. Felix cleared one narrow corridor between the relay and the old vessel. He could not keep it open, but he could warn Thomas when the ship tried to redirect his cutter. Leah prepared Northlight's orbital medical platforms to receive the first Istrovan chambers. She also built a simple return channel so Zeyra could send health data without mixing it into the mission command. After recovering the 2 test beacons, Thomas loaded all 7 into the cutter's release rack. Their positions formed an arc from the outer relay through the moving dust to a point less than a mile from the ancient ship's receiver. The first beacon would create the starting flash. The next 5 would release one command section, each through narrow direct beams, after receiving permission from the previous node. The last would confirm that the whole ordered sequence had completed and permit Zeyra to commit the lock. Zeyra checked each section against the ship's syntax. Her code did not translate human intentions. It proved that the person who had requested rescue was now redefining what completion meant. The difference mattered. If the sequence merely said stop, an old activation packet could start the mission again. If it said the rescue had been completed, the old packets would belong to a closed request. Thomas ran the flight path once more. The cutter had enough reserve to deliver Zeyra, set the beacons, and return. The margin was small. Every major course correction would take power from the trip home. Dana sent a final update. Thermal sinks are 12 minutes from the outer service rings. Those rings are empty. Occupied sectors follow in 3 hours. That is our clock. Yes. Thomas connected Zeyra's powerless pod to the cutter and flew toward the ancient ship. The service opening recognized her code and unfolded. Inside, the path divided. The cutter could go no farther without losing room to turn. Zeyra sealed her flight suit and prepared to cross from the pod to the ship. Thomas showed her the command chain with its 5 sections, 7 beacons, and final lock. She showed him the chamber routes she would manage from the core. Neither diagram contained a promise that both of them would return. Thomas touched the crooked ladder symbol. Zeyra added the little arms and legs she had drawn after his first mistake. Then she changed its posture. The figure stood upright. The language system suggested a rough meaning. Continue correctly this time. I can live with that, Thomas said. Zeyra listened to the translation, then repeated the only part she understood. Thomas, Zeyra. She crossed into the ancient ship. The inner door closed behind her. Thomas waited until her first green confirmation reached the cutter. She was inside. The mission edit path had opened. He turned toward the Revel drift. Inside the ancient ship, Zeyra Noal followed a corridor that had been built for rescuers dead for centuries. The walls responded to her authorization by showing scenes from the original disaster. A star swelled, cities were marked for evacuation, and ships like this one spread across an entire system. The records did not know the disaster was over. They did not know the worlds on the old map had changed. They knew only that a valid caller had requested rescue, and no recognized authority had completed the handover. Zeyra reached the mission core. 5 empty fields appeared around the active order. Her new command had a place to wait, but the live mission continued beside it. The collection units descending toward Northlight remained active. She opened the transaction with her local code. The core recognized her as the caller and exposed the chamber controls, but the first mission field remained empty. It would not accept permanent authorization until Thomas's physical chain delivered the matching section from outside. Using that temporary access, Zeyra isolated the Istravan life support channel from the collection process. It was not a true separation from the core. It was a protected route that would keep their energy stable while she moved the chambers. She sent Thomas one green pulse to show that she was ready. Thomas released the first beacon beside the outer relay. Its optical face turned toward the second position. The starting flash waited inside it. He flew on. The Revel drift thickened. Green fire moved across the cutter's forward shield. A false warning placed the ancient ship on his left, even though he could see it to his right. He shut off the long-range guidance and flew by the local markers Felix, sent in short bursts. The first position had been the easiest. The relay provided a stable reference and enough shelter to let the beacon orient itself. The second floated inside an open pocket that would close as the dust moved. Thomas had 9 minutes to place it, confirm the optical line, and leave before a charged ribbon crossed the route. He approached too quickly, fired the lower thrusters, and felt the cutter slide sideways instead of slowing. The dust had confused the automatic compensation. Thomas canceled the computer's correction and flew the final distance by hand. The beacon left the rack cleanly. It rotated toward the first point, but failed to find the flash. Thomas checked the geometry. The device was 6 feet below the calculated plane. 6 feet meant nothing on an ordinary rescue route. across the long optical link. The angle placed the relay behind a moving dust ridge. He nudged the beacon upward with the cutter's rescue arm. The first green connection appeared. Felix marked the placement from Northlight. Second node confirmed. That one was trying to hide. They're all identical. You have not spent enough time with rescue equipment. Thomas turned for the third position. Behind him, the charged ribbon crossed the route and erased the relay from his radio display. The optical connection stayed green. That small line mattered more than every timestamp on his board. At the third point, static shut down one of the cutter's external cameras. Thomas rotated the ship and used the rear camera to aim the release rack. The beacon emerged backward relative to his flight, corrected its own turn, and caught the second nodes. Flash. 3 points held. The command chain existed now, not as a theory on Zeyra's display, but as physical objects in space. Each new point also made retreat harder. Recovering the beacons in time was already impossible. Thomas had crossed the moment when the equipment could still be saved for Northlight's old evacuation route. First position stable, Felix said. The ship is trying to close your corridor. Tell it I filed the proper paperwork. It says your paperwork is being rescued. That sounds like Dana. Dana cut in. I heard that. The exchange lasted 3 seconds. Then another dust wave struck, and the channel vanished. Behind him, the first thermal sinks reached Northlight's outer service rings. Dana ordered the last maintenance teams below. The devices attached to the environmental grid and began pulling heat from sections that were already empty. The colony had not been harmed. The machine had started the process that would harm it. The first 3 beacons exchanged their physical acknowledgments. The second released Zeyra's authorization. The third followed with the status of the people already aboard. Inside the ancient ship, Zeyra received both sections through the vessel's external receiver. She placed the first 2 command fields into the waiting transaction. The ship accepted her identity and the status of the people already aboard. They were alive, they had been collected, and that part of the rescue was complete. The ship asked for receiving authority. Zeyra prepared herself, Thomas, and Northlight's medical channel as the joint handover path. The old system did not understand 2 civilizations. It understood 2 verified endpoints. For the first time since Ostrava, the chamber controls unlocked. Zeyra directed the first group toward the ship's outer base. The chambers could not simply be released. Each carried a separate thermal balance and needed a path that avoided the ship's active collection lanes. Zeyra grouped them according to life support demand, then assigned the most stable units to the first transfer. The Corps tried to return them to storage. Its current mission still considered the handover incomplete. Zeyra used the 2 verified command fields waiting inside the transaction as proof that a receiving process had begun. The ship allowed the chambers to continue, but it placed a timer beside every group. If the command sequence failed, it would pull them back. She sent the medical data to Leah through the separate return channel. Northlight's orbital platforms responded with ready signals. Human receivers had never been designed for Istrovan chambers. Leah compensated by directing each platform to match the chamber's existing power pulse instead of forcing it onto a human standard. The method did not wake anyone. It kept the first group stable outside the ancient hull. Zeyra watched the chambers cross into open space. The site was different from Ostrava. There, the ship had closed around her people, while every command she sent made the collection stronger. Here, the chambers moved outward because Thomas's physical chain and Northlight's medical response gave them somewhere recognized to go. One group hesitated at the edge of the bay. Its internal control had missed Leah's acknowledgement after a dust surge bent the radio return. Zeyra refused to send the acknowledgement again over the same path. A duplicate might arrive later and confuse a different chamber group. Instead, she used the old ship's local optical sensor to look directly at the receiving platform's light. The confirmation was visible. The chamber group continued. It was the same principle Thomas was building across the Ravel drift. Do not trust the time written inside a message when cause and effect could be observed directly. Zeyra opened the route for the next group and kept one hand over the live collection controls aimed at Northlight. Thomas released the 4th beacon. His power reserve fell below half. He could see the fifth position through a shimmering band of dust. He could also see the collection units descending from orbit toward Northlight's occupied sectors. Felix's voice returned in fragments. New packet approaching. Sunward path. Large. Thomas checked his map. The signal was one of Zeyra's old activation bursts. Time to impact. Less than 2 minutes. Thomas pushed the cutter harder. The old packet reached the ancient ship before he could release the fifth beacon. Every collection unit accelerated. Inside the core, the live mission returned to full priority. The new transaction remained open, holding the sections already delivered, but it had not yet changed the ship's behavior. Zeyra shifted her attention between two systems. She kept the Istravan chambers on the protected route, while diverting Northlight's thermal sinks away from occupied habitats. The old ship resisted. Its logic treated her diversion as a temporary obstruction, not a change of purpose. She could hold it. She could not hold it for long. Zeyra sent Thomas a red pulse, followed by the image of the 5 bars. He was running out of time. Thomas reached the 5th position and released the next beacon. The optical link failed. Dust hid the 4th device for 3 seconds at a time. Thomas adjusted the 5th beacon above the densest ribbon until its sensor caught each flash cleanly. The link turned green, and he moved toward the 6th position, which would carry the lock command. The cutter shuddered as electrical charge crossed its hull. 2 maneuvering ports reported reduced output. Thomas compensated, placed the 6th beacon, and aimed for the last point near the ancient ship. He released the terminal beacon less than a mile from the hull receiver. It oriented toward the 6th node and reported that the final physical link was ready. Thomas had just turned back to verify the whole arc when the 4th beacon went dark. Every green line after it vanished. Felix, confirm. Static answered. Thomas turned the cutter's cameras backward. The 4th device drifted inside the charged ribbon, its optical face black. No spare. No alternate line that could keep the physical sequence intact. The thermal sinks reached Northlight's first occupied ring. Dana's voice pushed through the static. Temperature is falling in Sector 2. Slowly, but it is falling. Evacuate that ring. Already moving them. Thomas, how long? He looked at the dead beacon. As long as the repair takes. He brought the cutter alongside the device and fired the stabilizers. 1 port failed to answer. The ship began drifting toward the charged ribbon. Thomas locked the remaining ports at maximum hold, put on his helmet, and entered the airlock. The dust outside moved like luminous fog. It was not dense enough to touch, but charge crawled through it in long green threads. His suit warned him that the field was above normal working limits. The beacon floated 30 feet away. Thomas crossed the distance on his maneuvering pack and caught the device. A discharge jumped through his right glove and numbed 2 fingers. The suit shunted most of the current away from his skin, but his hand responded slowly. He turned the beacon. The power cell was intact. The optical transmitter had burned at the same contact point he had repaired on Zeyra's pod. A familiar failure. That did not make it easy. He removed the transmitter cover. The cutter drifted another yard toward the dust stream. Felix returned on the channel, his voice breaking apart. Guiding thrust. 3%. Starboard. Thomas could not reach the cutter's controls. Remote correction. Ship is blocking the command channel. Thomas clipped the beacon to his suit, freed his left hand, and opened the remote rescue panel on his wrist. The old ship had taken the main guidance path. The local emergency port still answered because it operated by direct light. He aimed his wrist transmitter at the cutter and sent a short correction. The cutter fired 1 thruster and stopped drifting. Thomas returned to the beacon. The damaged contact had fused beneath a layer of alien dust. He scraped it clear, bridged it with the last spare conductor in his kit, and held the connection while the beacon restarted. Nothing. He checked the optical face. Misaligned by 4 degrees. His right hand would not grip properly. He locked his wrist against the housing and forced the face around with his forearm. The beacon saw the 3rd device. Green light flashed. The 5th beacon answered. Then the 6th. The chain was alive. Thomas sent the upright, crooked ladder figure to Zeyra. In the core, Zeyra saw the upright symbol appear beside the waiting command fields. Its meaning was clear. Continue correctly this time. Relief struck so sharply that she had to close her eyes for one breath. She answered with the same figure, then opened the next command section. The ship accepted the status of the Istvan chambers. It accepted the change from collection to awakening. It accepted the joint handover route. The fifth and final field still waited for the lock. Beyond the core, the first chamber groups moved into stable orbit around Orison. Leah's medical platforms received their signals. Human and Istvan hands now existed on both sides of the transfer. The last beacon had to deliver the terminal confirmation. Zeyra placed her hand over the jump drive control. The navigation lattice contained the only route that could take the ship back to Ostrava. If she burned the mission into that lattice, no one aboard would use it again. Her people would wake far from home. They would wake. Zeyra authorized the sacrifice of the jump drive and loaded the lock into the waiting transaction. The core now held all 5 sections, but would not commit them until Thomas's terminal beacon confirmed the unbroken physical chain. Thomas pulled himself back into the cutter. His right hand was recovering, but the suit still reported intermittent sensation loss. He left the glove sealed and used his left hand on the controls. The final beacon waited less than a mile from the ancient hull. He had placed it before turning back for the repair, but it had not yet seen the completed chain. One by one, the indicators turned green. The start signal was followed by identity, people already safe, new purpose, handover, and lock. At last, the terminal relay confirmed the full chain. The last device aimed a narrow beam at the ship. Thomas received Zeyra's final request for confirmation. He checked the sequence, not the timestamps, not the order in which his receiver displayed the radio echoes. He checked the physical acknowledgments from each beacon. All 7 formed one unbroken chain. Thomas pressed the final control. The terminal beacon flashed. The ancient ship accepted the lock command. For 1 second, nothing changed. Then the jump drive released all the energy stored in its navigation lattice. Blue-white light spread through the ship's hull. The field did not expand into a jump corridor. It folded inward, pouring through the mission core. The cutter rolled as a pressure wave crossed the dust. Every screen went black. Thomas lost Felix, Dana, Leah, the beacons, and Zeyra in the same instant. The ancient ship hung dark above Orison. Thomas waited as 1 second passed, then another. The cutter's attitude display returned first. His life support followed. The forward cameras came back with static running through the image. The ancient ship remained dark. Below it, the thermal sinks over Northlight had stopped moving. Thomas brought up the colony's environmental feed. The occupied service ring had lost several degrees, but the temperature was no longer falling. Heat was already returning from backup systems. The collection units released Northlight's network. Felix's voice arrived faintly. "Thomas, if you are alive, transmit anything." Thomas touched the local beacon control. "Anything." Felix made a sound halfway between a laugh and a breath he had been holding. "I have your signal. Guidance is coming back." Northlight control returned across every lane. "Dana wants to know about the ship." "So do I." A packet emerged from the dark hull. Thomas's first reaction was to check the signal path. It had come through the Ravel drift from outside the system, one of the old activation commands still completing its long journey. The ancient ship received it. Nothing changed. A reply appeared on Thomas's screen. The symbols were clearer now because Zeyra's command map gave his computer a frame of reference. The reply classified the packet as part of a completed rescue request and stated that no active collection was required. The old packet had arrived. It had not restored the old mission. Dana, the lock held, Northlight's operations chief, did not answer at once. When she did, her voice had lost its official distance. "Then come home." "Not yet." Thomas searched the old ship for Zeyra's signal. The mission core did not answer, but the chamber she had sent outward continued to broadcast steady life signs. Their small clusters moved into safe paths around Orison. Leah spoke over the medical channel. "I have the first. Chamber group. Energy stable. The ship is still supplying them. Can you see Zeyra?" "No personal signal." Thomas turned the cutter toward the ancient vessel. His right thrusters were damaged. Guidance remained unreliable, and he had only a narrow reserve of power. Felix built a return lane on the local emergency frequency, but Thomas did not follow it toward Northlight. "You are going the wrong direction," Felix said. "I need one pass by the service opening. Your fuel margin says otherwise." "My fuel margin has always been too pessimistic. It is a measurement." "Exactly. No imaginación." Dana cut into the channel. "One pass. Then you follow Felix home. That is not a discussion. One pass." The ship's hull lights returned as Thomas approached, but they were different. Before the lock, blue lines had run from the drive toward the collection bays. Now the light moved outward from the chambers and toward open docking ports. The vessel was no longer searching. It was waiting to hand people over. Thomas reached Zeyra's service opening. The inner door unfolded. Her signal appeared as a single green pulse. Then another. Zeyra emerged into the passage in her flight suit, moving slowly in the weak gravity. She had not been injured, but exhaustion showed in every motion. She reached the powerless survey pod and sealed herself inside. Thomas reconnected the pod to the cutter. Her face appeared on his display. For several seconds, neither of them tried to communicate. Then Zeyra showed him the upright, crooked ladder figure. Thomas leaned back against his seat. "Yes," he said, "correctly this time." His computer offered her the images attached to the sentence. She watched them and touched the window with one hand. Thomas returned the gesture against his own side of the glass. It was not an embrace. They were separated by two hulls and atmospheres neither of them had tested. It was an acknowledgement that they had both reached the end of their separate paths. Felix reminded him that his cutter was losing maneuvering efficiency. Thomas followed the guidance lane home. Northlight did not celebrate with a parade or a speech. The colony had cold service rings disrupted, traffic damaged guidance systems, and thousands of unexpected patients arriving in orbit. Dana put everyone who could help to work. Thomas slept for 5 hours while technicians repaired the cutter, and Leah's teams secured the first chamber group. When he woke, his right hand had regained full feeling. The medical report called the exposure minor and advised him not to repeat it. Dana met him at the orbital clinic's receiving bay. It was the first time he had seen her in person since the warning arrived. 8 rescue beacons, she said. 7 and 1 educational loss. All gone. They were very committed to the mission. Dana shook her head, but she could not hide her relief. Felix says the lane can be rebuilt. It will take weeks. The ancient ship is not leaving. We have time. That is the first useful thing it has done for us. Through the clinic window, the vessel rested against the curve of Orison. Its jump drive remained dead. It held orbit using ordinary thrusters, and Northlight's tugs had begun helping it maintain position. No one had tried to claim it. There was too much to learn, and there were too many people aboard for that kind of argument to matter yet. "Zeyra?" Thomas asked, with Leah. "They are preparing to wake the first specialist." Thomas started toward the medical section. Dana stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You made the right recommendation. We were seconds from losing the occupied ring. That does not make it wrong." Thomas looked at the old ship. "It makes it expensive. The good decisions usually are." She released him and returned to work. The first waking chamber had been moved into a sealed medical bay where human air met the chamber only through filters and exchange membranes. Zeyra stood beside it in a borrowed pressure suit adapted to her body. The blue markings at her temples were brighter than Thomas remembered, perhaps from fatigue or emotion. Leah monitored the chamber from the other side of the glass. "The occupant is a cryogenic systems technician," she told Thomas. Zeyra selected him because he can verify the rest of the chambers from inside their own control language. The name on the translated record was Thomas and Zeyra. The waking process took almost an hour. No dramatic gasp broke the silence. The chamber slowly raised Tuvin's temperature, restored normal circulation, and reduced the support field in measured steps. His eyes opened once, closed again, then remained open. He saw Zeyra. Confusion moved across his face. Through the chamber display, Zeyra showed him a sequence of Ostrava, the rescue, Orison, and handover. Then she included the record of her activation code. Tuvin's eyes fixed on her. He did not smile. He did not forgive her. He asked questions in rapid Istvan speech while Leah's instruments watched his condition. Zeyra answered each question. Thomas could follow only the images. He saw the solar eruptions over Ostrava, the ancient ship arriving, the chambers closing, the delayed warnings, the 7-beacon chain, and the dead jump drive. At last, Tuvin placed a hand against the inner surface of the chamber. Zeyra raised hers, but he turned his hand toward the system controls instead. Work first. She accepted that. Once Tuvin was strong enough, he examined the chamber network from his bed. His verification took another 3 hours. He confirmed that the new mission had reached every active chamber. No hidden collection cycle remained. No delayed command could reopen it without a new authorized request. Only then did Leah approve the next waking group. Yarakim was among them. She had held a civic coordination role on Ostrava before the emergency, which made her the closest thing the sleepers had to a representative. Zeyra gave her the same complete record she had given Tuvin. Yarakim listened without interruption. When the sequence ended, she looked past Zeyra to Thomas and Leah, then through the medical window toward Orison. Her first request was not punishment. She asked for the condition of every chamber, the available medical capacity, and the time required to wake the rest safely. Leah answered through images and the growing share vocabulary. Months, if they avoided unnecessary risk. Yarakim accepted the estimate. Then she addressed Zeyra. Thomas did not understand the words, but the translation system built a rough meaning from repeated symbols. You called the ship. You stopped it. Both remained true. Zeyra lowered her head in acknowledgement. Yarakim assigned her to help with every waking group. It was not forgiveness. It was responsibility with work attached. Zeyra accepted that too. During the following days, the ancient ship became something its builders had never intended. Northlight supplied power, medical equipment, and orbital tugs. The Istvan supplied knowledge as more technicians woke. Together, they converted empty collection bays into recovery areas and disconnected the thermal sinks from the old mission controls. The jump drive remained dark. Its loss shaped every plan. Without it, the Istravans could not return to Ostrava quickly. The human ships at Orison were too small and too slow to carry thousands across the distance. A route home would take time to develop. But time now belonged to the people who had been rescued, not to the machine. Thomas spent most of those days rebuilding communication paths. He worked with Felix to create safe traffic lanes around the fixed ship and with Tuvin to understand which signals the ancient systems would accept. They did not build a miraculous translator. They built a practical vocabulary with words for air, power, pain, stable, awake, wait, safe, and help. Then came names, times, places, and choices. Each word was tied to something both civilizations could verify. When a sound remained uncertain, they returned to pictures and actions instead of pretending they understood. Thomas insisted that every important word survive one test in each direction. It was not enough for a human speaker to point at a power cell and say power. An Istvan speaker had to use the word later in a different room and cause a human technician to select the correct system. The method was slow, but mistakes became visible before they could grow. The word for awake caused trouble. Human medical staff used it for open eyes and normal awareness. The Istvan term also carried the idea that a person had been returned to their own decisions. A chamber occupant whose eyes were open, but whose movements remained controlled by the old ship, was not fully awake by Zeyra's definition. Thomas added choice to the medical checklist. Zeyra added a human-style confirmation step to the chamber controls. That small exchange became one of the first things their two groups built together that the ancient ship had never contained. Time proved harder. Human hours meant nothing to the Istravans, while Istvan flight cycles shifted with local gravity and work conditions. Thomas returned to the beacon method. They selected a pulse both receivers could observe, counted outward from it, and attached appointments to the shared count. No one needed to surrender their own clock. They only needed to agree which event came first. Zeyra learned enough English to recognize Thomas's humor before the language system explained it. Thomas learned enough of her expressions to know when she found a human suggestion reckless, incomplete, or merely inefficient. The distinctions mattered. On the fourth day, he proposed routing 3 medical channels through one relay to save power. Zeyra gave him the old stumbling ladder figure. "That is not a technical objection," he said. She added an image of all 3 channels failing together. "Fine. It is an excellent technical objection." The silver rings around her eyes narrowed with amusement. They separated the channels. Hours later, a power fluctuation struck one relay. The other 2 remained active. Zeyra sent him the upright version of the figure. Correctly this time, Zeyra divided her time between the waking chambers and the communication work. Thomas saw her less often than he expected. Whenever she appeared, she carried new medical records, corrected an Istravan term, or helped test a link. They were no longer trapped together inside an emergency. That changed the meaning of every time she chose to return. One evening, Thomas found her in a former collection bay overlooking Orison. The transparent outer wall had once helped the ship identify approaching populations. Now rows of recovery equipment filled the space. Zeyra stood near the glass, watching Northlight's lights on the dark surface below. Thomas joined her. The language system could now carry simple sentences if they spoke slowly. "Your people are waking," he said. Zeyra listened to the Istravan approximation. "Slow. Safe." Leah prefers both of those words. "Dana also." Thomas smiled. "You learned quickly." Zeyra looked at him. "Dana teaches with face." He laughed. "Yes, she does." For a while, they watched the curve of Orison. Zeyra brought up an image of Ostrava. Between the 2 worlds, she drew a route with many steps instead of one jump. "Home," she said. Then she pointed toward the waking chambers. Choice. Her people might return. They might stay. Some might do both over time. The important thing was that the ship would no longer decide for them. Thomas pointed toward Northlight, then the communication panels around them. "Work finished," he said. Zeyra tilted her head. His computer clarified what Zeyra had understood. The rescue work was finished, and the communication work was no longer required. Thomas tried again. "I can leave." Zeyra went still. He added, "I choose to stay." The translation was not graceful, but it was clear. The silver rings around her eyes narrowed, and the expression he had learned was close to a smile. "Good choice," she said. No declaration followed. They had both learned the danger of attaching meaning too quickly to an incomplete sequence. Thomas stayed beside her until Leah requested Zeyra in the next recovery bay. Then they returned to work. The direct communication path took 6 days to complete. Thomas and Felix mapped a clear line between Northlight's orbital relay and the ancient ship, one that did not curve through the Revel drift. Tuvin adjusted the old vessel's receiver so it would not route local messages into the long-range rescue network. The new link was simple. Light crossed open space. The receiving station acknowledged it. No message could spend months wandering through charged dust and arrive after its consequences. Thomas ran the final test from Northlight. He sent a pulse at an agreed time. The ancient ship returned it exactly when expected. Felix signed off on the lane. Dana took Thomas off emergency duty and ordered him to sleep for a full night before finding another reason to climb outside a ship. For the first time since the warning, Thomas had no immediate task. He returned to his quarters beneath Northlight's surface and set his receiver beside the window. Orison's night was clear. The ancient ship passed overhead as a moving line of pale light. At the scheduled test interval, his receiver chimed. The sender was Zeyra Noal. Thomas opened the message. It named a location aboard the fixed ship, the former observation bay. It carried a time written in the shared system they had built from the beacon chain. Below both was a short sentence assembled from words they had verified together. The message said, "Thomas Renwick. Meet me again. Not emergency." He checked the time. The message had arrived exactly when Zeyra intended. No old command followed it. No delayed warning changed its meaning. Nothing from the past reached through the Revel drift to overwrite her choice. Thomas read it once more, then sent one word through the same direct line. Yes. Above Northlight, the ancient rescue ship continued across the sky, unable to take anyone away. For the first time in its long existence, it carried no unfinished rescue. And for the first time since two worlds had learned of each other, a message arrived in the right place, in the right order, at exactly the right time. Some messages crossed the distance between stars. Others crossed fear, regret, and the silence between two hearts. Thomas and Zeyra had survived both, not because they understood every word, but because they chose to answer. If Thomas and Zeyra's journey stayed with you, please like the video, share it with someone who believes the right message can still arrive at the right time, and subscribe for more journeys in a strange new worlds. Until the next signal finds us, keep looking toward the stars and never be afraid to answer.